Good evening to everyone gathered here. This is Muhammad Tariq, Intern's team of Biodiversity Conservation Foundation. We all have one goal, that is to conserve nature. More say, to not disturb its wilderness. We as a human being who coexist with ecosystem, we aren't fixers. Instead, we strive to make sure nature's true potential doesn't get lost in the new world. Their exceptional resilience being their true potential, we as a team aspire to create a world where the environment doesn't need protection. We, Biodiversity Conservation Foundation India, as a team ensure passionate involvement towards conservation of wildlife and natural resources. Our team also works in creating awareness among common people and drive young minds towards conservation. We strongly believe that awareness is a major factor that helps people to understand the natural world and diverge them from mistreating it. With more than 40 webinars collaborating experts from around the globe, this platform connects the volunteers holding various degrees of environmental knowledge varying from low to high with international experts. The team actively held numerous webinars about the biodiversity of water, land, air, even during this lockdown, ensuring the conservation and awareness carried out stays independent of the pandemic. And of course, our journey doesn't stop here. We extend our role through various research based studies and on field conservation measures. We actively encourage young minds and involve them in projects that can nurture their knowledge and skill. Our team has grown tremendously ever since the establishment of BCF India. Today is yet another day where we tell ourselves that protecting the planet cannot be done by a single government or organization. I welcome you all once again for an international webinar on marine biodiversity of India, the known and unknown. Over to you, my team member, Ms. Marina Johnson, for introducing our honorable speaker, Dr. A. Vijayakumar. Thank you.
Good evening to all. I'm Marina Johnson, intern of BCF. I'm very privileged in introducing our today's speaker, Dr. A. Bijukumar, Professor and HOD, Department of Aquatic Biology and Fisheries, University of Kerala, on this 45th international webinar. He completed his bachelor's in zoology from University College, University of Kerala, and master's in aquatic biology and fisheries from University of Kerala. Then he took MPhil and later PhD in aquatic biology and fisheries from University of Kerala. He worked as lecturer in zoology from 1994 to 98 and then as senior lecturer from 98 to 2003 and as lecturer selection grade from 2003 to 2007. Since 2011, he is head of department in the Department of Aquatic Biology and Fisheries from University of Kerala. He has also worked as scientific officer in State Committee on Science, Technology and Environment from Government of Kerala from 1998 to 2002. He has also worked as State Nodal Officer of National Green Corps, the School Eco Club scheme of Ministry of Environment and Forest, Government of India during the period 2001 to 2002. He has also worked as Principal Scientific Officer and Member Secretary of Kerala State Biodiversity Board from 2006 to 2007. He has received various awards and fellowships which include in 1990 he was awarded with CSIR UGC lectureship. In 1992 he received Junior Research Fellowship of University Grants Commission. In 1997 he received Young Scientist Award by STEC Government of Kerala in the field of life sciences. In 1998, he received Young Scientist Award by Indian Academy of Environmental Sciences and Bangalore University at the 4th National Seminar on Fish and Their Environment. Good Service Entry from Government of Kerala for the excellent conduct of 14th Kerala Science Congress. Letter of Appreciation from Ministry of Environment and Forest, Government of India for successfully implementing the National Green Corps in Kerala State. In 2016, he received Highest Research Grant Award in Faculty in Science and Applied Science constituted by University of Kerala. His research areas comprises of taxonomy, biodiversity documentation and informatics, and aquatic ecology and fisheries. Dr. Biju Kumar is life member in various organizations across India. To highlight few of them, he is member in Marine Biological Association of India, Indian Fisheries Association, Indian Aquaculture Society, Inland Fisheries Society of India, Society of Environmental Education Kerala, Zoo Outreach Organization India, Indian Science Writers Association, Limnological Association of Kerala, the Society of Fisheries Technologists, the International Zoo Education Association, South Asian Regional Network, and founder member of Center for Innovation in Science and Social Action. He has about 245 publications and has done various projects too. BCF is happy in connecting the eminent professionals, stakeholders, students, and public on this international webinar during this festive season. We are delighted to connect our eminent speaker, Dr. A. Bijukumar, Professor and HOD in Department of Aquatic Biology and Fisheries, University of Kerala, on this virtual forum and waiting to listen on Marine Biodiversity of India, the known and the unknown. Over to you, sir. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. I thank the organizers and wish you all happy Diwali. Let me start first of all, I wanted to tell you that in the next 1 hour, 1.5 hours, we'll be discussing about various aspects of marine biodiversity research, not only in India, but on a global scale. And also we'll discuss the solution, the programs to go ahead and what are the major gaps as far as marine biodiversity research in India is concerned. And then some of the suggestions how we can better the whole arena of research, marine research as far as India is concerned. And then we'll go for a discussion, and you are free to ask any of these questions connected with this field or suggestions in this regard. Okay, let me now present my. Good evening, welcome to all, and I'll speak on marine biodiversity of India, the known and unknown paradigms. And before I go into the details of the topic, the ocean is connected to all, specifically in India, because it's actually a part of our cultural legacy. And as you know, the primary, the biodiversity element in the oceans around India, particularly the fish, the Matsya, is an avatar of Rigvedic god Vishnu. And then we have, many of our the cultural stories connected with the oceans. And we also have a very long history. As you can see, the symbols and signs from the Indus Valley civilization. And this recent studies also reveal the fact that people of Indus Valley civilization have used monsoon wind and currents for maritime trade and navigation as early as 2500 BC. And all these things indicate that we have a very, very long connection with the oceans right from the beginning. And current scenario is that, a large number of people are employed in this sector. And also the government of India is getting a considerable chunk of money through the trade of marine products from India. I'll come to that in detail. And also, if you look at the straight from the beginning, if you look at the way in which the Indians, the approach to the sea as a source for livelihood, as a source of inspiration, as a source of the materials from the oceans, it's a very, very long history. I'm not detailing everything, but this is a country where the people started worshipping ocean. The people dependent on the ocean for biological resources and their livelihood. And also, this is a land where people really understood the ocean. They tried to understand the ocean. That's very, very important. And if you look at the Tamil Nadu, a place again where people had a very, very long history of close intimacy with oceans. And if you look at the way in which the people observe the nature and try to divide it into 5 physiogeographic zones, for example, and the people have divided the landmass into thin ice. Thin ice means 5 specific geographical areas, starting with the Kurji, which is the mountainous region, Mullai, which is the forest, Marudam, which is the cropland, and Palai, which is the desert, and Neithal, which is the seashore. So that means, which is the very right from the beginning, the people observe the nature and try to classify the the landscape into different components, and one of the component is the Natal, which is nothing but the seashore. Okay, and also if you look at the Sangam literature, and then the coastal population were called Minavar or Paravar. Mean is actually a common term for fish, both in Tamil and Malayalam, and those who actually fish is called Minavar. Okay, and and also in there is another interpretation for the terminology. It's called the Marakalam. Marakalam is actually a wooden vessel that floats on the water, which the fishermen used to fish. And in Kerala, the people who actually fish with the Marakalam is called the Marakar, which is again another terminology for the fishermen. Okay, so all these things, and also the way in which the people, in earlier India, the ancient India, they found out the fish, and they have no technology, they have no other way, but they have the observation, and they have they have identified the shoals by sight, by sound, and smell. And why I explained all these things is that the modern science, especially in the modern academic scenario, the students or the researchers lack. They have a lot of knowledge, they have the technology with them, but they actually lack, not all, but many of them lack the intimate connectivity between the ocean and and the science and the learning. And that means they lose the sight, sound, and smell of the ocean, but they have the access to technology. Okay, and also there is a very interesting book called the Valavishu Puranam. It's also translated as an epic on fishing. Which is the first treatise in the 12th century written on the arts and sciences related with fishing. All these things are an indication that the Indians had a very, very long close connectivity with oceans around them. And I am also explaining you another very interesting scenario. In again a typical example from Kerala, where which is actually an example of how the ocean travelers or the fishermen who are actually venturing in the ocean were selected precisely. And this system is called Karanila system. Karanila is actually a system where the people who actually wish to travel in the ocean, they have to stay back in the shore, and those who are actually physically fit enough to go run and touch the boat first, they will get the initial chance of getting into the ocean. And this is again a system which actually take care of the fitness of the people who actually venture into the ocean. Okay, so this is called the shore status. Okay, that means those who actually prove seaworthiness every time, they are actually selected for fishing. So this is another indication how you have to behave in the ocean, because you have to be physically fit. And another very interesting system which is totally lost in the era of globalization, and that is the way in which the resources were actually given and parted with the people in the villages. And when the fisherman's boat, there were no trawlers, but all traditional fisherman's boat, they come back after the harvest. How the catch was actually distributed among the people in the village. This is an interesting scenario where the first share of the fish catch or the catch goes to the widows and the handicapped, and another share goes to the mentally and physically handicapped people, and the another share will go to the community service providers, including the barbers. Okay, and which will almost form 5 to 7% of the catch. Then only the remaining catch was divided among the fishermen. A very good, socially relevant system of partitioning the resources based on the priority. The priority, the weaker people in the coastal belt, they used to get it. And that is the reason why, in India, even in the ancient and the modern India, we hardly heard of any nutritional death or the poverty death in the coastal area, because the oceans provided them with all the resources. But it was heard in the hilly tracts, in the Western Ghats, and in the forested areas. And that means the ocean provided them with sufficient resources for their own survival, their own nutritional security, and also the system, the social fabric in the coastal areas. It ensured them that even the weaker sections of the society will get their share of resources in just for survival and making sure that everybody will get the resources from the ocean. Okay. And also, if you look at the traditional knowledge, this is very, and they also, the fishermen along the Indian coast, they also possessed a very good ecosystem knowledge on the oceans. And this is very, very important. You know, the people in Tamil Nadu and Kerala and many parts of India, they possessed very good knowledge about the ecosystems, the so-called micro ecosystems, as well as the ecosystems prevailing in the ocean. They exactly know where the underwater reefs are, and they exactly know where to fish, how to fish, avoiding, you know, all the kind of damages to the fishing gear. And also they know the seasonality, they know the migratory routes of the fishes, and they also know how to detect the fishes looking at the smell, sound, etc. So all these things, you know, give us an idea about the ecosystem knowledge of the communities, and that is also very, very important before we speak about the marine biodiversity of India. Okay, and I just explained some of the connectivity of the Indians with the oceans and with the marine ecosystems and biodiversity. And now I'll just, in my talk, I'll explain the oceans, particularly as a new hope for future, the marine biodiversity status of India, and what are the major threats, and then what are the emerging areas as far as research and you know, the knowledge gathering is concerned, and future research options, especially in a global scale, and when we compare it with India, and how we can move forward. So this is going to be the outline of my lecture. So I'm not explaining all these, you know, the points, and just to tell you that why the oceans are important when we discuss about the biodiversity in specifically. And first thing to remember when we try to learn about the marine ecosystems and the role of oceans, the only thing which you have to understand is there is only one ocean with many ocean basins, and it covers almost more than 70% of the planet's surface. So the planet is basically ocean. A major part is oceans, and in the oceans you will see almost all the geographical features which you witness in land as well. For example, the Earth's highest peak, the deepest valleys, the flattest plains, everything is in ocean. It is not in the land. Okay, we have larger mountains than Everest in the ocean. And you know, if you believe that had the ocean, so had the Earth been very flat, and the water could have gone up to a height of almost 4 kilometers, 3.7 kilometers. That is actually the volume of water the ocean hold. And you know, almost 98% of the Earth's water. And now the recent studies show that almost 90% of the total biomass of Earth is in oceans. And more importantly, 40% of the world population lives 60 kilometers from the coast. That means they are all coastal population. 40% of the global population or world population. And also you remember that ocean as an ecosystem, as a mega ecosystem, it regulates the climate. Reason is very simple. There is interconnected circulation system powered by wind, tides, and the force of Earth's rotation. And therefore the world's climate is regulated by oceans. And in India, the monsoon is strongly influenced by the oceans around us. And that is the reason why any kind of climate change would have its own implications in the availability of resources in the ocean, as well as it determine the future of the ocean. And you know, the oxygen availability in the planet. This is ensured primarily by the floating phytoplanktons in the ocean. And also it is a sink for carbon dioxide. So you can see that the largest amount of carbon dioxide is actually go into the oceans, and it control the heat budget of our planet. Okay, and also many of the geochemical cycles, including nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, and carbon. Everything is primarily centered in the oceans. And oceans are very important because, you know, whatever you see in the land, it has a connectivity with the oceans. For example, if you look at larger lakes, larger rivers in the planet, and everything finally empty into the ocean, and there is an interconnected between ocean and the terrestrial ecosystems. And also a majority of the nutrients which in the coastal waters, it may also come from the land-based systems. And also, if you look at the future of the planet and the resources, and it is a future reservoir for water, minerals, life-saving drugs, and energy. And remember, why this talk is very important, or whoever speak about ocean is very important for future, and it is the largest unexplored place on Earth. Less than 5% of it is explored. Okay, and that means it's actually a less explored area in terms of biodiversity. And finally, earlier there was a belief that the ocean possesses infinite resources. It's not true, and now we understand that the resources in the ocean is always finite, and the resources are limited, and that is the reason why we need to go for conservation. Okay, and just like any other system, the ocean is also a thin layer on the Earth's surface, thinner than the skin of an apple. When you look at the thickness of the water which cover the ocean water which cover the planet, and therefore it is inherently fragile and finite. And that is the reason why, if you compare the planet and planetary perspective and think from a planetary perspective, the ocean has to be protected, because it is as sensitive as any other ecosystem on the planet. Okay, and also this is a place where biodiversity is so high in the sense that it harbors the largest organism in the world and perhaps the smallest organism in the world. And I'll come to the details of the biodiversity later. And if you look at the phyla, the phylal diversity or diversity of animal phylum, and then also this is very, very important as a habitat. For example, this is actually an organism which belongs to the phylum Cycliophora. And Cycliophora, as a phylum, it was discovered in 1995, and it lives among the mouthparts of lobsters. And that organism is now classified as a separate phylum itself. That means a habitat for a phylum is the buccal cavity or the mouth cavity of a lobster. So the diversity is so high, which is actually unknown to us. And when it is known, this is a very strange scenario. And we had a feeling that the larger organisms like whales are all discovered because they are larger enough for early discovery. And it is not true. And even now, we believe now in the era of molecular genetics and molecular taxonomy, we are actually delineating the larger marine mammals. And this is the Peruvian beaked whales discovered in 1991. And this is an animal which is present in the South Pacific, and the smallest beaked whale. Okay, only the size of a small dolphin. And this is a new discovery. That means even the larger whales are discovered in the recent past. And some of the the living fossils like megamouth shark, which might have evolved in the planet along with dinosaurs and still continuing without much changes. Not a discovery not far off. Okay, so this is very interesting. Animals are also there, and we will see more importantly, if you compare terrestrial ecosystem with the marine ecosystem, remember that it is rich in phylal diversity or diversity of animal phylum. Out of the 32 out of the 35 described animal phyla are represented in the oceans, which means the diversity, animal diversity in terms of phylum, phyla is very, very high. Okay, and also all the levels of diversity which you see or which we study as part of the biodiversity, which include genetic diversity, species diversity, ecosystem diversity. It's also all these things are represented well in the marine ecosystem. And therefore, the functional diversity, which is actually the complex interrelationship between these components in the ecosystem, it is also well represented in the oceans. Okay, and if you really wanted to know, particularly those youngsters in this group who wanted to know how diverse is the system and what are the recent studies initiated. This is a finest example of the biodiversity documentation as a collaboration between institutions. Okay, so this project is called Census of Marine Life, which actually began in 2000 and completed in 2010. The 10-year expeditions in different parts of the oceans actually brought out a larger amount of data, 30 million observations across the world, and where 2,700 scientists participated from 80 nations. And I'm not going to describe any of the results because all these observations are available in the website of Census of Marine Life. But in the 10-year period, they could document almost 30,000 species new in the planet, which is an indication that the larger explorations are needed in the oceans to realize the biodiversity. Now, the basic question, the million-dollar question: how many organisms live in the oceans? Okay, nobody could answer that question. There are varying statistics if you go through the scientific literature. But this study is about the microbial diversity, global microbial diversity, which is brought out last year. Which gives you an indication that Earth is home to about 1 trillion, that means 10 raised to 12 microbial species. And majority of them live in the oceans. That means the major part of the planetary diversity is represented by microbial species, of which we know absolutely nothing. Because they are the one which actually control many of the cycles in the planet, but we have no idea about that. That means if you count the number of species which inhabit the ocean, and then the number may be astonishing, because we have no idea at all now. Okay, and if you look at the future, what is the importance of marine biodiversity? Many of the maritime nations across the world, they have a new project called the Blue Development and Blue Growth, or blue economy. That means an economy which is based on the marine resources, and that increases the importance of marine biodiversity. And currently about 1/6 of the world's 2 million described species are marine, but the estimated biodiversity is 2/3 of the world's biodiversity. That means currently what we know is only 1/6 of the global biodiversity which is living in the ocean, but the estimated biodiversity of the ocean may be 2/3 of the global biodiversity. And many of the areas of the ocean, as I explained earlier, is unexplored, and particularly the deep sea resources. And many scientists believe that tens of millions of undescribed species or undiscovered species are there in the oceans. And this is particularly important for countries like India or tropical countries in general, where the invertebrates, particularly the invertebrates and smaller organism microbes, are almost totally unexplored. Okay, particularly in some of the critical ecosystems. And if you look at the future, even now, many of the life-saving medicines and interesting molecules comes from the oceans. And that is a reason why we speak a lot about blue biotechnology, because ocean is going to be the source for a large number of novel molecules, life-saving medicines, and of course, inspiration for biomimetics, which I will describe later. And there are some specific areas, particularly along the Indian Oceans and the Indian coast, which are least explored, and they are called the seamounts. And in Indian Ocean, relatively few seamounts and islands are there, but at the same time, it contains submarine plateaus and races, and these areas are least explored. And there are now specific programs by NIO and other organizations who actually focus on this area. I'm sure that in the next few years, we will hear a lot about these sea mountains and the biodiversity of seamounts. And the deep sea benthic habitats are often studied with advanced technologies, and therefore there are some limitations because the equipments are highly expensive, and that is one of the handicap as far as the developing countries like India is concerned. But these are the hotspots of marine biodiversity and home for a lot of endemic animals. Endemism in general is not that much common as far as larger oceans are concerned, and at the same time in sea mounts and related areas you can see a lot of endemism. Fewer than 300 out of the 200,000 existing sea mounts have been explored so far. So this is an indication that how much least studied are these ecosystems in the oceans. And coming to another area which is less explored, and these are deep oceans. Okay, And the deep oceans, once said to be lesser in diversity, is now believed to be very, very rich in biodiversity, thanks to new technologies and thanks to dedicated team of researchers who actually wanted to find out the deep sea biodiversity. And the recent studies with sophisticated underwater diving equipments revealed that even the Mariana Trench carry a large number of interesting creatures. And for example, I'm not explaining everything, but if you look at this organism, this is a fish, a deep sea fish. It's called the Mariana snailfish. It's found at the depth of the Mariana Trench in the Western Pacific Ocean, and you can see the the micro CT scan image of these organisms. Very interesting. And this is the Yeti crab with a very interesting chemosynthetic connectivity as well. So that means all these areas are very interesting to study. And the future, blue economy or blue growth. And blue economy, I told you already, a lot of scope for economic benefit from the oceans. And these are the areas which are actually focused in this. And one is actually, this is a source for the aquaculture, because land-based agricultural activities, the areas for agriculture are coming down, and there is a lot of scope, particularly for growing plants. We are looking more and more into the oceans, and aquaculture is a larger promise. And second is actually the coastal tourism and connected activities, maritime tourism, a lot of scope, because world's famous and most expensive tourism destinations are in the oceans. And second, I told you, third, I told you biotechnology. A lot of novel molecules are coming from the oceans, and actually the entire the drug manufacturing industry across the world, they focus their attention primarily in the oceans because of very curious and interesting molecules, biological molecules. And renewable energy, and not only the wind, but also it's a source of geothermal as well as tidal energy. So a lot of scope for expanding that sector as well. And ultimately mineral resources, and once we exhaust the resources from the earth, definitely there'll be more and more focus. And even now a lot of research is going on how to explore these minerals, and of course the environmental implications of that as well. So the scientists believe that blue economy, it is going to give a lot of revenue for the countries across the world, particularly the maritime nations across the world. And there is going to be twofold increase in aquaculture, one-fold increase in fisheries, and fourfold increase in the maritime trade and shipping, and a lot of scope for coastal tourism, oil and gas exploration, offshore wind as a source of energy, and ultimately deep sea or seabed mining. So these are the areas for future, and these are the resources which ultimately strengthen the blue economy or blue growth. Then when you look at two targets, which is the HE targets of the Convention on Biological Diversity, as well as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, if you look at these two targets, there also you will see a lot of focus on marine organisms and the marine conservation of marine biodiversity. I will come to the details later, but you look at the future conservation plans also, the deep sea area or the life below water is actually an area which is getting a lot of international attention as a means of development or sustainable development. Okay. And if you look specifically, come back to Indian Ocean and coming back to the Indian scenario, you'll see that from a geographical perspective, most of the world's oceans, the major ocean area is undersampled, particularly the Indian Ocean. And marine biodiversity, biological diversity is challenging, especially in the recent past due to broad-scale human activities, because human interventions, as you see from the the World Ocean Assessment Report, this is an area which is impacted by the human activity. That means we need to document the resources to realize the importance and the diversity of the resources available in the ocean. Okay, and also the impacts are poorly documented, primarily because many of the impacts are not directly visible, and that is the reason why the ocean, the impact are not precisely known to the common man. Okay. Now, coming back to the marine biodiversity of India, this table tells you the story. Okay, And here are the groups of organisms. As you can see, I'm not explaining one by one because that is not expected out of this talk. But just to tell you that this is the diversity available in India, which include the microalgae, seagrass, and mangroves. That means the plant components. Altogether, it may be around 15,000 plus, which is far less. Compared to any other system anywhere in the world. That means what is known to us from the marine ecosystems across India is considerably less compared to the knowledge that we have from many other parts of the world. Okay, but some of the groups are relatively well explored. I'll come to that. But many of the groups, as you can see here, the minor groups, the minor phylum, they have no well studied as far as India is concerned. Some of the major groups, yes, we are good in documenting that, particularly the mollusca, the crustacea, etc., and of course fish. And at the same time, many of the minor phyla or minor groups are not explored. And for that matter, for many of these groups, there are no taxonomists in India also. That is another thing. Okay. And the studies so far identified 9 critical habitats as far as India is concerned. And that include Andaman and Nicobar, Lakshadweep, Gulf of Kutch, Gulf of Khambat, Gulf of Mannar, Bhitarkanika, which is part of Orissa, the Sundarban in West Bengal, and Gulf of Malwan and Gulf of Karwar. And most of the these critical habitats, if you look specifically, they are all either they are coral reef habitat or they are mangrove habitats. So that reveals the importance of corals as well as mangroves in determining or in realizing the marine biodiversity of India. Okay. And if you look at the recent report of Zoological Survey of India, which says that in India, the marine biodiversity totally, including plants and animals, together form around 21,663. And again, it's a lesser number. 21,000 is less number. For example, many of the scientists, the Census of Marine Life itself, the documents reveal that 1 liter of seawater from the tropical belt carry more than 20,000 species of bacteria in it. Okay, so which is an indication that whatever is known to us is very, very less. And coming to the species-wise or the phyla-wise or the group-wise documentation of biodiversity, one of the primary, I start with plants, seaweeds, relatively well documented in India, but there are some minor species which are still to be explored and confirmed, but we have more than 1,000 species of seaweeds across India, particularly associated with rocky habitat as well as coral reefs. And we have 14 species of seagrass. Again, this is a very critical ecosystem because this is a very important in terms of ecosystem services, as well as this is a major habitat for the most critically endangered marine mammal, dugong, as well as the green turtle. Okay, so that is a very important habitat, but highly restricted. If you have a considerably good area of seagrasses along the Gulf of Mannar and Andaman and Nicobar Island and Lakshadweep. Okay, and Protozoa, now it's called Protista. It is with 2,577 species, and we have Porifera, or the sponges, represented by 476 species. Cnidaria, which include the famous jellyfish as well as the hydrozoans, and they are represented by 1,300 plus species. And remember, the coral reefs are there, and they are in the critically endangered category, some of the species, and they are very, very important in terms of ecosystem functions as well. Actiniaria, the sea anemones, they are also very, very important as far as cnidarians are concerned, 75 species. And I know, based on our survey along the southwest coast of India, there are many species, still many species which are not fully documented. Okay, Hydrozoa, very interesting group, but except for a few researchers in India from BNHS and related institutions, nobody is seriously documenting hydrozoans. Very interesting group, but highly complicated. Again, the Coelenterata group or the Cnidaria group. And Scyphozoa, we have 178 species, but again, a lot of research is going on, considering their increase in the number in the recent past. Cubosova, the Cuba jellyfish or the box jellyfish, represented by 30 species. And corals, these are the corals in the, all the corals, hard corals as well as soft corals are in the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act as far as India is concerned. And Staurozoa, Anthozoa, Ctenophora, 12 species we have, the comb jellies, Platyhelminthes, 832 species. But remember, again, maybe I know only 1 or 2 taxonomists in India working in this field now, but very interesting, very attractive group of organisms with a lot of diversity, particularly in the shallow water rocky reef area as well as in the coral reef. But we need to have a further strengthen this documentation. And Arthropoda or the Crustacea is relatively well documented because of their commercial importance, but some of the lesser known groups are still there. And Pygano, the sea spider, again 36 species along the Indian coast, and the Limulus or the king crab, 2 species. This is called a living fossil, very common in the east coast of India, particularly along the Odisha and Odisha coast. Copepoda, still diversity still may be very, very high because no scientists specifically work on the free living copepods along the Indian coast in the recent past. Few people worked earlier. Ostracoda, again, we have better knowledge on the freshwater ostracods, but not as far as the estuarine and marine species are concerned. The Branchiura, the sea, the fish lice, and the Thecostraca, 74 species. Mycetacea, so 84 species. Euphausiacea, 23 species. Cumacea, 88 species. Candidacea, 3 species. Isopoda, which include free living as well as parasitic, as you can see here, a parasite, isopod parasite, inside, almost replacing a tongue of a fish. And a few researchers are still working, including in our own lab. And Amphipoda, relatively well documented because some scientists in the earlier later part of 20th century, they worked specifically on this group, 167 species, but diversity may be still more. Stomatopoda, 93 species, the Squilla, and the Branchiura, the crab, relatively well documented, but deep sea forms are relatively unknown as far as India is concerned, particularly from some of the methane seep areas. Anomura, the hermit crabs, very interesting group, but relatively well known, but many things to do. The Canadian shrimps, quite interesting ornamental species which are traded also for the marine aquarium trade. And Nemertea, a group which can be confused with many other groups, but little known from India. Gnathostomulida, again, which an organism which live among the sand. Gastrotricha, again similar group of organisms, little known. Rotifera, then Ciliata. Again, the diversity may be much higher, but very little known from India. Cynorhyncha, similarly. Acanthocephala, basically a parasite on the vertebrates in the oceans, but relatively known, but still possibility of many species. Entoprocta, absolutely no much information. Nematoda, there are few groups, including in NIO, working on this group, but our knowledge is relatively very less compared to the diversity. Phoronida, again represented by few species. Brachiopoda, 4 species only, but very interesting group to study, but not much information available. Mollusca, relatively well known thanks to some of the legends in this field who initiated detailed studies in this group, relatively better known, but I know some of our researchers working in this group, the micro mollusks are absolutely new area of research for somebody to take up, not much known. Bryozoa, very interesting group of organisms. Again, somebody worked on it earlier. Saipangulida, again, 38 species. Annelida, particularly the polychaetes are relatively well known as far as India is concerned. We had some taxonomists worked earlier in this group. Echura, very interesting group, particularly abundant in the estuarine belt as well as in the benthic ecosystem. But we need to have a more stronger study in this field as well. Tardigrada, those who youngsters, these are the organisms which are in the news in the recent past, because these are the organisms which are believed to be the hardiest organism in the planet, but little known as far as Indian systems are concerned. Echinodermata, thanks to some of the dedicated researchers like Dr. James, our documentation is relatively good, and but we have still new species coming up from this group. Echinodermata, which includes sea stars, the brittle star, the sea urchins, the sea cucumber, all these groups. And Ketonata, 44 species, Protochordata, 522 species, Hemichordata, 14 species, and the fish fauna are represented by almost 1,500 species. 2,618 species, but still some of the critical habitats are to be studied. But as you can see, majority of the marine fish discoveries in India comes from the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which is true also. It's a coral reef area, a lot of, and also then comes the Lakshadweep area, and West Coast is also a very good resource, as well as East Coast. So majority of them are commercially important and hence relatively well documented. And some of these species which are to be focused for research are the endangered species, or the so-called scheduled species, which is shown in this poster here. Some of the species which are in the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act of India, which include all the seahorses and Syngnathy forms, which include the seahorses as well as the their close cousins, and the whale shark and the other members of the group of Elasmobranchs. And this group, particularly those who are in the East Coast, may have a look at this group, particularly the sawfish. Very, very few records in the recent past. And again, a group to focus our research and attention, because they're all of conservation importance. Sawfish, more threatened than tigers. And now India has actually banned the export of shark fins, but yet the clandestine activities are continuing. But this is a group which is to be conserved as far as Indian waters are concerned, including the sawfish and the whale shark. And a lot of ornamental species and commercially valuable species. I'm not detailing all these groups. And commercially, these are very, very important because of a few reasons. And one reason is that, as you can see here, the total marine fish production globally, it's now plateauing. Plateauing is almost all the commercially valuable species. Their harvest from the natural ecosystem has now reached the sustainable level. That means we cannot actually further increase the fisheries, particularly of the commercially important species. And that is the reason why, as you can see here, there is more and more thrust on aquaculture, because nature is giving the sustainability has reached. And this is an annual report of the fish landing report of Central Marine Fisheries Research Institute in 2019, which shows you the story, what is actually the current landing. Last year, the landing was 3.56 million tons. And again, we are seeing the plateauing of the fishery resource availability, and except for some of the deep sea and mesopelagic species, which we need to focus for future. At the same time, there is an interesting scenario. When the resources are less, then the value will be high. And that is a scenario which is seen here. Through the export of marine products, India is gaining much more money compared to the earlier period. India, for example, last year, the total the export value for Indian marine fishery products was around 46,662 crores. It's almost 6.68 billion. Remember, and this is despite the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic. And this is a scenario that means our export and the earning from the export of marine products are increasing. Thanks to aquaculture, doesn't mean that all the things comes from nature. And thanks to aquaculture and production in aquaculture sector, and we are exporting more marine products from India. But the diversity of marine organisms we export from India is increasing in the recent past. And reptilia, including sea snakes, we have 26 species of sea snakes, and then 4 very important species of turtles. All marine sea turtles, all are in the Schedule 1 list. Very, very important, especially as their breeding grounds need protection. I'll come to that. And we have only one saltwater crocodile, the Crocodylus porosus, very abundantly available along the east coast of India. Okay, and as far as sea birds are concerned, total number of seabirds in the world is around 359, and we have around 63 species recorded from India. So then there are lesser number of scientists actually work on these groups, particularly their migratory patterns, on their migratory patterns. Okay. The final group, as far as marine biodiversity in India is concerned, is the marine mammals. 29 species is an earlier record, but now the many scientists believe that we have only 21 species because some of them are misidentified, so we can restrict the number as 21 now, 21. Okay, so 21 species which are very commonly occurring in India, which include the whales, the dugong, the dolphins, the killer whale, and all these groups. Okay, and as far as India is concerned, their commercial production is concerned, we are one of the topmost countries as far as marine fish landings are concerned. I am not detailing all these things because that's not directly relevant. Coming specifically back to the topic, what is actually the problem in documenting marine biodiversity in India? The first issue is the reflection of taxonomic impediment. And many of you are aware the taxonomic impediment scenario, as far as India is concerned, we have lesser number of taxonomies. This is a global phenomena, and that is the reflection is there in India also. And particularly, the uneven distribution of the taxonomic expertise in institutions. You look at major institutions which do taxonomy in India, there also the marine taxonomies are less. And you look at the marine research institutions, there also the pure taxonomies are very, very less in number. And that is reflected in the poor documentation of marine biodiversity in India is concerned. Okay, so this is a scenario. I am not, because this is one thing which is very close to my heart, so I am not discussing in detail. So we need, but remember that there are a lesser number of taxonomies available for India, and taxonomy is also not a priority area for funding as far as marine research is concerned. All these things actually pull back the documentation process as far as India is concerned. And lesser number of taxonomic expertise, lesser number of monographs, lesser number of field guides, and decreasing taxonomy expertise in national institutions, all are issues as far as India is concerned. And we have a database which is which will be on and off, and that is biosearch.in, maintained by National Institute of Oceanography, which document the marine biodiversity of India, but which need updating and curation for many species. And the taxonomic knowledge in India is very, very less. It's far from complete. And we need to have more and more focus, because this is, and also we need more and more much collaboration between institutions, because it's all, for example, if an institution A, institution B, they're all doing research in marine field and they are not collaborating each other, because both of them use public money, and then it's a waste of money. It may not be pleasant for many years, but this is a fact. So the many institutions working as watertight compartments, they are not collaborating because they don't have taxonomic expertise in many groups. What we need in India, particularly in the post-COVID era, is actually the networking of researchers in all the institutions, irrespective of government, non-government, etc., academic or research, etc. But we need more collaboration, because we are all working with the public money. And we need to have some better explorations as a coordinated team, and division of labor between the groups, and go for a higher exploration or the large scale exploration, which is done in many parts of the world. Because what we need for conservation in future is not small bit of information which comes from an university or a college, but we need a huge amount of data. And that kind of a data only will help in conserving biodiversity and documenting biodiversity. And then only we know what really exists in the oceans. So this kind of a knowledge is required. And also we need to, influence the policymakers that, the biotechnology or the gene and the biomolecules alone are not science, but science is there in the biodiversity documentation and taxonomy as well. So this kind of a coordination and this kind of a realization is required to, strengthen biodiversity research in India. Another problem, we always speak about technology, but we are not applying technology in the areas which actually demand it and which actually require it immediately. What is to be required as far as India is concerned? It is to document digitally all the museum collections in India in different institutions. That's first requirement. And unfortunately, if you look at a type specimen in many of the national repositories in India, we may not get it in good shape, and the data availability may not be that much smooth, and their data is not public as well. So this is unlike in many of the international institutions like Smithsonian, where they have almost completed the digitization process of the type specimens, and that is something which is required. We need to have better repositories. We need to have more digitization of data, so that the youngster who is coming into this field may not find it cumbersome. Okay, and also we need lesser amount of ecosystem-based studies, and this is also very, very important. And we have lesser, documentation of the larger marine ecosystems in Indian waters, and the migratory species and their behavior and their, the biology patterns. And if you look at the post-graduation studies in many of the, the life sciences disciplines, and taxonomy is not given. It is taught up to degree level, and for the post-graduation level, it is totally ignored, and that is again the scenario. And that is the reason why the youngsters find it very difficult to actually do research in this field and get a better understanding about this research. Okay, and many of our realization about the biodiversity also should be strengthened. For example, commercial or the fishery data, for example, you look at this data for crabs. If you look at any of the scientific or fishery documentation in India, you will see it as Portunus pelagicus. Okay, and the recent studies, molecular studies, says that these are all not the same. They are different species. For example, what you see in the predominant species in India may be Portunus reticulatus, the species shown as C here, this one. This is not Portunus pelagicus, but if you look at many of the data as far as India is concerned, you will see their documentation as Portunus pelagicus. And we have some species, for example, Seguinis in the west coast of India, and we don't know whether the actual Portunus armatus is there, but majority of them may be reticulatus. That means we have multiple species, and we document them as a single species. So that means we need to have finer, the integrative taxonomy study, which incorporate both morphological data as well as the molecular data, particularly in realizing the cryptic species, which looks morphologically similar but maybe genetically different. Okay, so we need to have some kind of renovation in thinking. Okay, and we need to forget about the conflict of interest between the institutions. We need to have better collaboration, and everyone remains watertight, and that should go, particularly in the post-COVID era, where we'll have lesser amount of resources available for doing research. And we need to bring in more and more innovative ideas on taxonomy and biodiversity, particularly to attract, the international funding options. Because if you apply for a documentation or exploratory study, we are going to get lesser amount of money as part of international projects. But we need to have more and more innovative ideas in terms of essential biodiversity variables, in terms of big data analysis, etc. And that is very, very important. And as far as India is concerned. Okay. And there are some suggestions, and one primary suggestion, I'm not reading out all the major points, but what is required, some of them already explained, but we need to have a stronger ocean policy for India, especially when the government is trying to give more importance for the resources in the ocean. Giving importance for the resources alone is not important, but the conservation part is also very, very important. So we need to have an ocean policy as far as India is concerned. We need to, incorporate all the modern technologies in biodiversity research as well, and we need to have quality publications. And if you look at many of the recent taxonomic studies, including new species records, many of them appear in the so-called predatory journals and low-quality journals, and these are actually ruining the whole spirit of taxonomy as far as India is concerned. So the youngsters, my request to many youngsters who are actually attending this webinar is that you never go for predatory journals as far as publication of your results are concerned. You go for good quality, peer-reviewed, indexed journals, and that will help definitely in improving the quality of taxonomy research in India. Okay, And also the senior researchers, the senior taxonomists should also see that the subject, they form a lobby to include this subject as one of the major subjects in their post-graduation and studies, and also make the study rather interesting, rather than cumbersome. So taxonomy, many people, including many of the teacher fellows, consider it as a difficult subject. It is not so. Primarily, it is happening because they are not integrating field work along with taxonomy work. Okay, and that is the reason why. And many of the people, teachers who unfortunately teach taxonomy are not taxonomists. And these are the things, why the students are not interested in taxonomy research. And I also speak about 3 C's, which are very important in marine biodiversity research. And one is collaboration, second is coordination, and third is communities. I'll explain that later, but one, collaboration, the collaboration between institutions. And we can work only in that, in the post-COVID era. And coordination. There should be some leaders who actually coordinate the activity, and there should be one leader actually to do research, because somebody should be there as a leader. And we need to have more and more leaders in marine conservation as well as taxonomy is concerned. And then third component, which is given lesser importance as far as marine biodiversity research is concerned, that is communities. Coastal communities, we need to involve them in. And for example, if you look at the butterfly research in India, you look at the bird watching in India, there is involvement of communities, there is involvement of amateurs, which is not happening as far as marine biodiversity is concerned. We need to have a better look on that. And we need to have better lobbying so that the public will understand that this is a very important area of research. For example, you look at the terrestrial side, the people are attracted people take up interest in conservation primarily because they see some of the animals as critically endangered. Some of the animals are listed in the red list, but that is not happening as far as marine things are concerned. So we need to increase the public perception about marine biodiversity and oceans in general. And that is very, very important, because only when there is a public demand is there, public pressure is there, and then definitely the marine biodiversity, marine research, and the oceans in general will get much more attention from the policymakers and politicians. And that is very, very important. Okay. And many other species are not discovered. This is important. Somebody and many people, it cannot be done by a single person in India, because India is such a larger habitat. Marine habitats are such complicated. So from every marine state in India, we need to have a few people coming up for doing marine taxonomy. Why I showed this slide is because, just to explain you the situation of hermit crab taxonomy in Kerala coast, for example. And when in 2005, we have only 9 species documented from Kerala coast. And one lady student, Rashmi, came with a taxonomy fellowship and joined for PhD under my guideship. And then she started doing research with all the limitation of a girl student in field work and collection. And after 3 years of her study, she could document 40 species. And we need to. So I'm explaining a scenario of the diversity of a small group of organism called hermit crab in Kerala coast. Till 2005, we have only 9 species documented from the Kerala coast, the hermit crabs. Okay, and then one of my students took up a research for 3 years, and she, despite all the limitations in field work, she started surveying the organism, and 3 years of research yielded 40 species. And these are the 4 species she documented, and this is the species which we documented later. So it resulted in the documentation of 40 species from the Kerala coast and the description of 4 new species. That means somebody has to take up the work seriously and explore the areas for different groups, so that we can have better documentation. There are issues, I am sure, and one is actually the issue with the fund, and but we need to overcome that through better coordination between the departments and integrated taxonomy projects. I am not explaining the other shortfalls, because that is not there is no time. But remember, a lot of technologies are coming up. But I am sure that many of the marine research institutions in India have no access with many of these technologies. I'll come to that later. And these are the technologies required for the deep sea exploration. So we need to have more and more money specifically to document the deep sea biodiversity along the Indian waters, as well as the research in the underwater or the sea mounts or sea mountains. And these are the modern tools used for the research, but particularly the remotely operated vehicles, which will give you the documentation of the biodiversity, the benthic biodiversity in a larger manner. And also, if you look at some of the biological studies, behavioral studies, there is absolutely no document as far as India is concerned. This is an area where, again, Indian researchers can focus attention. Biology, ethology, these kind of studies we need to focus, particularly for conservation. Okay, and see a typical example of some of the researchers are available. For example, a very famous person called James Cameron and his research using submarines and robots. This is an equipment designed specifically for venturing into the deepest part in the Earth, or in the planet, we can say. So this vessel traveled to the deepest part on Earth. Okay, so it's the depth is more than that of the Mount Everest, inverted. This is a Challenger Deep, the deepest part in the planet. So probably this may not happen in India in the immediate past because it's expensive, highly expensive. But there are, if you really wanted to know the unknown, we need to have more and more technology. But the remote sensing, the space research in India do take care of some of the activities. Particularly, they have a stronger project on documenting the potential fishing zones in India, and of course ocean forecasting, including the natural disasters. So the systems are coming up, and the coral bleaching alerts. This is another area initiated by the Space Research Institution in India, and some of the areas definitely are better now, particularly for documenting the the resources. But remember, none of them actually involve the biodiversity research per se, but none of them definitely involve the precise taxonomy research. But they all have the commercial importance connected with that. Okay, so the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services, they have these interesting projects, including the documentation of harmful algal blooms along the Indian coast. And deep sea definitely is a resource, untapped resource. Huge amount of biomolecules are now coming up. As you can see here, the DNA polymerase enzyme is a contribution of this from this area, and pharmaceuticals. A lot of life-saving medicines are coming up from marine organisms, and this is an area where a lot of research is actually money is spent on a global research. And also, there are some interesting observations. For example, this is a scenario when with Dr. Dipani, we were on an unsuccessful attempt to locate a whale, a humpback whale, which is tagged from Oman and which traveled up to the Indian coast from Goa came to Cochin. Then we took up, we took the help of the Coast Guard in trying to document this animal surfacing. And finally, we, with the help of the satellite telemetry, it was recorded that this animal stayed back in Gulf of Mannar for a few days. and a few weeks, in fact, and then they returned back to Oman. But what is not known to us is that, what is the purpose of the migration of larger migratory animals like humpback whales? And what is their food material as far as Indian waters are concerned? Why do they come? Where do they feed, and where do they breed? All these things are important, and this need again some kind of coordinated research as well as money, because this is a very curious organism, as you can see. Among these larger animals, these animals are known for very, very interesting kinds of behaviors across the oceans. As you can see from this BBC documentary, they are the ones actually which create the bubbles. And just to confuse the shoal fish, circular bowls they create, and what you see as a background sound is the sound of humpback whale. And then they fish, they confuse the fish and the fish from this area. Very interesting group of organisms, and many things to learn. The way they feed, the bubble net feeding. They create a net of bubbles, confuse the shoal fish, and feed from within.
A dozen whales work together to harvest the herring bonanza.
The very interesting pattern of bubble net building and then feeding from within. Okay, so we also have a lot of documentation from, thanks to some of the very young researchers available in India doing marine mammal research. A lot of interesting observations are coming in the recent past, particularly documentation of these organisms. And these are some of our discoveries in the recent past from the Kerala coast, which are, I'm sure with all the limitations, these are less, but a lot of scope for enhancing research. And this slide is particularly important, which shows the importance of associating citizen scientists with marine biodiversity documentation. So when we were there in our lab, one group of fishermen community members who actually formed an association called Friends of Marine Life, they approached us saying that they have a very interesting underwater observation and documentation. And they approached us and they provided us with relatively good quality photos. Then we started identifying this with our students, and finally found out that whatever they documented from a small stretch of rocky shore along the Trivandrum coast of Kerala include 15 species of nudibranchs, the sea slugs, and including new records from India and 5 new records from west coast of India. Just an underwater observation, because they regularly go for fishing, and then the fishermen also document, because the young fishermen interested in documenting underwater biodiversity, they started documenting. And when we scientifically validated the whole thing, and it included 2 new records for India and 5 new records for the west coast of India. So it's a very interesting way how we can actually involve the fishermen also to document the biodiversity and also publish the results, so that their name will also be involved, and then the science will get its share of data. We need integrative taxonomy studies. As you can see here, the proportion of barcode, the molecular DNA barcode available for many of the groups as far as India is concerned, relatively very less, relatively very less. And also the available information is a bit confusing as well, complicating with this all the predatory journals contributing to the complexity. Anyway, so we need much more data in integrative taxonomy, combining more molecular as well as the other studies. So then we definitely need a relook or re-examination of the scheduled species of India, because this list was prepared quite long, and there are some species which are very abundant, but many of the very rare species are not at all there in the scheduled list. So we need to have a relook at the scheduled list of species, marine species, as far as India is concerned. Okay. And also many of the red listed species, the species which are listed as endangered, critically endangered, the marine animals which are not protected in Indian Wildlife Protection Act. So there is something contradictory. So the scientific group or the researchers in India, we need to sit together and actually sort out this issue. And that should also come as a priority as far as marine conservation is concerned. Okay. And you can see here the species included in the list. And if you look at all the species, less than 2% of them are invertebrates. Okay, that means invertebrates are not getting priority as far as red listing, IUCN red listing is concerned. And that is also a sad part of the story. And if you look at the pressure happening in the marine side, you can see a lot of, this is a publication in Nature in 2020, which actually gives you an idea about the amount of pressure happening right from 1860 up till now. And you can see that hunting was a pressure earlier, but it is not an issue because it is regulated in many parts of the world. At the same time, fishing was not a problem because it was sustainable in the early part of the century and the earlier century. And at the same time, now it's becoming a very, very serious threat to the marine biodiversity. And deforestation, particularly the destruction of the mangroves, it's a serious issue in many parts of the world. Habitat loss, this is a serious issue, but in the recent past, this is bettering because of the very stringent initiatives in many parts of the world. But now we have another kind of threat as far as oceans is concerned. And that is actually the fertilizer which actually we use in the land-based systems, and finally it's leaching out in the oceans. Plastic, synthetic chemicals, these are becoming a serious issue as far as oceans are concerned. And climate change is another threat. That means you look at the the scenario in the last 200 years, then you can see that the pressure created by the humans as well as the natural pressure on the marine ecosystems are now becoming slightly different. When we have a conservation priorities and some stringent measures coming in terms of habitat loss and habitat management, some of the other issues are now much more complicated, like the amount of eutrophication in the ocean and the complications created by the climate change. So this is an overall understanding about the pressure in the oceans. And how do you assess it? In the terrestrial ecosystem, for example, in the forest, we can all see the changes directly. Okay, but in the marine system, many of the things are not visible. Then let us discuss what are the signs of unsustainability as far as the marine resources are concerned. One, we have an indication. This can be an indicator as far as the sustainability of the system is concerned. Marine fisheries. Marine fisheries is reaching a plateau. That means it has reached, in many commercially valuable species, it has reached the peak. That means we cannot further enhance the fishery, but we have to go for conservation. Second, another issue is fishing down the food web. That means majority of the predators are lost. Larger fishes are lost from the system. That means when we fish continuously, we focus more and more on the organism down in the food web. That phenomenon is called fishing down the food web, defined by the famous marine biologist Daniel Pauly and his team. Shifting baselines. Shifting baseline is a common issue as in many parts of the world, where if you have no documentation, for example, on the marine biodiversity, what will you do? I am doing the marine biodiversity survey in a particular area. So that is the baseline. We have no historical data. We continuously shift the baselines. This is an issue. Then overcapacity. Large number of fishing vessels are there beyond the capacity, and that is another issue. Deep sea fishing policy. We have no yet finalized. We are discussing it for the last 20 years, but we have no final document asset. And decline in the predatory species, increase in the opportunity species, all are reflections of ecosystem level changes happening in the marine systems in India. And it's still more are there, increase in the incidence of harmful algal blooms, which is relatively less. Fishermen gives you very, very important information, particularly the traditional knowledge. And we were discussing with some of the fishermen in the southwest coast of India in the recent past, in the last few years. They were telling that, after the last few cyclones, after the Oki cyclone, the amount of harmful algae is coming down in the coast. And when we compared the data with the published literature, this is also true. So they have very good documentation about knowledge about some other things which is happening in the oceans at the micro level. Jellyfish blooms increasing, but again the recent few years, the blooms are not that frequent. Then the system is changing continuously, which demand continuous documentation of the biodiversity and the changes in the ecosystem. Coral bleaching is becoming very, very fast. Because of the El Nino phenomena, the coral bleaching is now becoming very rampant in many of the coral reef ecosystems all across India and all across the world. And there are some issues between trade and conservation. These are some social issues. I'm not detailing that. And then there are gaps in the biodiversity knowledge. I already told you, in many of the ecosystems, our documentation, historic documentation as well as current documentation, is not up to date. And big data, the so-called big data, is not available from many other systems. And we have information in the form of published papers coming in between, and that is not good for scientific documentation and scientific conservation planning. Climate adaptation. Climate adaptation, we are only speaking about it, beginning to speak about that. We need to have better climate adaptation program, particularly for the coastal communities and marine protected areas. We have many in paper, but compared to the terrestrial systems, it is far from complete. And then we have no marine science policy. So these are some of the critical issues we have to address. These are some of the indications of the marine harmful algal blooms increasing along the Indian coast, and the jellyfish blooms, why increasing in Indian coast. We need to have a better study. We are actually doing some work on that. And the climate change, there is sea surface temperature increasing the storms and cyclones all along the Indian coast. Everything proved there is change in water chemistry. The seawater is becoming more and more acidic, and the nutrient availability is enhancing or increasing in the shallow coastal waters, which increases the productivity, which in turn contribute to some other changes, including the harmful algae blooms. So the climate is changing along the Indian coast. We need to better documentation, because the implications are the highly complex, as you see in these graphics. There are ecosystem impacts, there are direct impacts, there are socio-economic impacts. So our studies need to be more and more comprehensive, rather holistic, so that we will document all the issues connected with the climate change and the oceans. And some of the documents, thanks to the involvement of CMFRA researchers, we now know that there are some species shifting their locations because of climate change. As you have seen here, the Sardinella longiceps, because of the sea surface temperature increases, they are actually moving northwards. And also remember, there are some oxygen minimum zones appearing in the coastal waters of India, which is now focused by many researchers in India. Why the oxygen minimum zones are increasing in the Indian coast, and what is its connectivity and relation with the fishery potential. All these things are the future areas of research. And some of the species like this, the triggerfish, red-toothed triggerfish, Odonos niger, they are increasing in population as per the records of CMFRA. And why they are increasing, what is the reason for the increase, all the things are very interesting or fascinating for future research. And many of the areas we need the participation of communities. For example, sea turtle. There are large number of, thanks to NGOs, documentation is relatively better, but it is not, again, holistic and comprehensive. And for example, this is a scenario where I usually go very frequently just to see what is the changes happening in the coastal areas of Kerala. For example, here you can see this is a beach, one of the beaches where largest number of olive ridley turtles came and nested in Kerala coast. This is a scenario now after 10-15 years. Now this is a scenario because of sea erosion. The beaches are not stable and all protected by granite walls. All are hindrances, the loss of habitats for critically endangered species. And coral bleaching, we started documenting it and their impact on the hard-shelled organisms like corals, echinoderms, foraminiferans, coccolithophores. All the things remains to be studied in detail as far as India is concerned. And the sea level change is happening in India and near countries, as you can see here. And some of the areas are very critical as far as sea level rise is concerned. We need to have better adaptation and programs for the coastal communities and in this area. And the critical ecosystems are mangroves and seagrasses. Both are in danger as far as India is concerned. And their role in habitat protection, coastal habitat protection, is better realized. But we need to have specific programs all along Indian coast for their conservation and management. Okay. And estuaries is in another area where we need to focus our research, but relatively little known. Relatively little known, particularly the impact of climate change and loss of resources and how it will in turn implicate the coastal water productivity is something which is not known to us, and these are the areas where we need to have more and more data. And as far as the social implications of biodiversity loss is concerned, we need to have a better focus on how the resources availability, the strengthen the social economy, and how the decline in the resource availability ultimately will question the very livelihood of the coastal communities, and how better conservation platforms will enhance their livelihood options. All the things are areas of research. There are research happening in this area as well. And the pollution aspect, there are a few groups which study the marine debris, which is actually marine debris is actually an area which is now taken up by many of the researchers, because many of the land-based pollution ultimately will reach the oceans and change the the way in which the biodiversity survive in the systems. And that is the reason why the microplastics and the plastic marine debris research is an important area of research in this area. And many of the people believe that there will be more plastic in water than fish in the by the end of this century, which may be an exaggerated statement, but we need to have better documentation of facts to arrive at that conclusion. And the plastic will also the marine debris will also serve as actually transferring the species, particularly invasive species, to different parts of the oceans. There are some interesting stories or the research publications which tells you the story that some of the species carried on plastic debris or marine debris are transported hundreds and thousands of kilometers across the oceans, because they remain as a perfect platform for the organisms to settle. So this is something called the mega rafting. And recently we have documented the charu mussels from the estuarine ecosystems in Kerala, and we also believe that the cyclonic events may have contributed to the enhancement of distribution of these invasive species in the coastal waters of India. Okay. So microplastics, I'm not detailing because we need a separate session on that, microplastics in the oceans. But if you look at the global scenario, this is the way in which these are the sources through which the microplastics reach the oceans. The car tire, which we consider lesser important, is one major source. Synthetic textiles, which we wash with the wash basins, the washing machines, finally reach the oceans. This is another major source. And the city dust, it is another major source of the microplastic distribution in the marine environment. So unlike what is our general feeling, we feel that the microplastics reach the oceans from the plastic waste. It is not true. If you look at the globally, the planetary scale, then the major source of microplastic contamination in the ocean is actually the washing of the synthetic cloth in the washing machines. Okay, the fibrils are released every time you wash. These fibrils are released into the water and finally reach the ocean. The tire, which we discard, that is another source. The city dust, it also carries huge amount of the microplastics in the oceans. So we can see that whatever we do in the terrestrial systems ultimately are reflected in the oceans as well. So our implications, our interventions in the land also will have a serious repercussion in the oceanic environment. So the aquatic life is impacted by the oceans because of so many issues. And as you can see here, the macroplastics, the way in which they interfere with the life of the marine organisms by entangling, by ingestion, and as you can see, a straw getting into the nostrils of the turtle, and these issues are there, which are relatively well documented. But this is a photograph by Nishan, which shows a plastic lid got into the the beak of the tern. And so these impacts are very high. Recent studies using the fluorescent dyes and experiments shows that they are ingested into the body, they got into the the circulation systems, and ultimately have the health impacts as well. And what is the health impact on human beings? And the research is now on. And then another very interesting area is the biofilms, because this is called the plastisphere. And when there is a plastic particle in the ocean, it got colonized by bacteria, and then they will speed up the whole process of chemical corrosion, and then even the pathogenic bacteria are carried to long distances with these microplastics. So this plastisphere, the so-called plastisphere research is also happening in the marine ecosystems in a larger, and they reach the deep sea, and what is its implication in the biogeochemical cycles and on the health of the organism there, we don't know. So a lot of areas are there where we need to focus our attention as far as plastics are concerned. There are some small solutions actually forwarded, and this is actually a solution suggested by the Kerala government, where they convinced the tall boat fishermen and asked them to bring back whatever plastic got into their trawl net, and they bring it back and they are shredded and by the women self-help groups called Kudumbashree, and then used for construction of road, etc., etc. So one way in which we can involve the fishing community also to clean up the waste in the oceans. These are a few lesser models available in the system. We need to have better awareness ultimately, like the one initiated by Afroz Shah, and people in Mumbai or Maharashtra is aware of the activity of Afroz Shah, who initially, as a single-handedly initiated the coastal cleanup drive, and later many people joined, and it became a community even. And this is a scenario now of the Versova beach, and even an initiative by a single person will make a lot of change in the coastal area or in the oceans. Typical example of what happened in the Versova beach in Mumbai. Okay, and so we need to have a lot of thinking about the conservation issues are concerned. We need to strengthen the regional organizations and place climate change agenda as a priority. We need to address transboundary resource use. Evolving common platforms are sharing best practices and better awareness about the coastal adaptation of the coastal communities. And we also make sure whether the fishing communities are actually involved in the policy making. Unfortunately, that is not happening in many policy making processes as far as India is concerned, because they are the people who actually suffer from all our interventions, lack of resources and the coastal area development, unscientific coastal area development, but whether they are actually represented in the policy making. And this is a question which we have to address in future. And when we look at the strengthening of blue economy for future, we need to be sure that it is inclusive. Inclusive means it involves everyone, every stakeholder involved. And whether we have a pre-informed, precautionary and adaptive principle in the policy making exercise, and whether the policy and the data is accountable and transparent, and whether it is holistic, cross-sectional and long-term. All these things, all these sustainability principles should be incorporated in framing blue economy, blue development scenarios. And we need to have a national strategy for marine science to promote community science, to promote biodiversity documentation and research in this field. And then we need to have more and more technology involved in documentation as well as planning. And as far as marine sites are concerned, the coastal ecosystems are concerned, we need to have a better ecosystem-based planning and the spatial planning, so that the development will be sustainable and scientific. So this kind of a planning is also required. We need a top-down approach, rather we need a bottom-up approach. Whatever is happening now is a top-down approach, because the government and the policy makers will decide on the policy, and it is actually given to the community for final implementation. And it should be other way around. We should have bottom-up approach. The planning and the conservation should come up from the the stakeholders in the coastal areas, and then we can develop better plan for blue and white economy. And then we need to have a stronger view on ocean and the human interactions, because it's actually humans are intricately connected with the oceanic ecosystem as well as oceanic resources, and we need to have a better understanding of it, because this is a highly circular and interconnected scenario where we need to have a better understanding how the man and society are interconnected with the resources available in the oceans and vice versa. Okay, and in fishery sector also, we need to have more and more conservation oriented approaches, more and more key conservation of key biodiversity areas. First, we have to identify these key biodiversity areas along the Indian coast, which some of the initiatives are already there, and then protected area network. Protected area network is very fragmentary as far as India is concerned. Freshwater is concerned, no protected area at all, but marine, many things associated with the coral reef ecosystems alone. But there are some hotspots of taxonomic diversity which we need to conserve. Okay, so all these things are required as far as the coastal area is concerned. And tourism is actually a treasure hunt as far as the future of India is concerned. But we need not make larger sophisticated hotels around India to make tourism sustainable. What we have to do is actually have a revised thinking. Why not attract the tourists, showcasing our the marine cuisines and marine food? Okay, and ask them to stay back in the homestays and enjoy the nature. And do not make any of the larger infrastructure along the coastal, because the tourists are coming here to enjoy the nature and the wonderful food we have, the wonderful climate that we have. And that kind of an ecosystem and the responsible tourism initiatives should actually happen in the coastal area so that it can be better oriented. And then, as you can see here, the marine protected areas are less represented in the Indian coast. We need to have better percentage of area covered under protected area in Indian coast, which you can see is underrepresented as far as India is concerned in the current scenario. Okay, and also we have to have holistic research to understand what are the real issues. And if you look at the real issues, main real issues in India is not the lack of policies and the rules, but poor management and governance. So that is an area where we need to focus our attention, especially when you think independently and comprehensively. And people are not bad in conservation. We have examples from the women's self-help groups in conserving the mangroves in Maharashtra. We have better examples in some part of India where the people are involved in conservation and the co-management. Co-management is something we have to think very seriously as far as India is concerned. Coastal biodiversity conservation is concerned. Co-management is a concept which involves people in management affairs. Okay, so because they are there to protect the resources primarily because it is their livelihood. Okay, so we need to engage and involve the people in this exercise, and people are not bad in conservation. We need to have a relook in the whole conservation planning as far as India is concerned. And then we need to have a cutting edge research parallelly happening, because conservation genetics is something which is particularly in the marine area. Okay, so when we look at the future and the way forward, and we need to have better program in connecting oceans to the people. Ocean policy, ocean literacy. Why that is important, I'll explain that in the next few slides. And the connecting biodiversity to people is very important, particularly in ecosystem level management of the species. Because if you look at the future, many things are connected with the oceans. For example, blue growth and blue economy, achieving Aichi target, which we failed in fact in 2020. But when you look at 2030, there is United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, where there is a focus on marine biodiversity and life below water. And more importantly, 2021, 2030 is an UN decade for ecosystem restoration. Same period is very important for marine people and marine researchers, because it is an international decade of ocean science for sustainable development. And that is the reason why we need to focus more on the ocean in the next 10 years. And there are wonderful, literature available in the form of novels, in the form of research literature, which really should inspire the people. And the young teachers should actually advise your students also to read and to watch some of the wonderful programs like the Blue Planet 2, which is now broadcasted by BBC. All the things will inspire the people and return their love back to the oceans, and these are very important. The literature and awareness and education is very important as far as ocean conservation is concerned. And then the Indian philosophy very clearly says that the whole planet is actually carried on a turtle which lives in the ocean. So that means any kind of disturbance to the turtle and the marine biodiversity will ultimately spoil the entire sustenance of the planet. That is the philosophy, and that should be our mantra as well. We should have a bottom-up philosophy, and the ocean should continue to inspire people. For that, conservation is very, very important, because it's actually an inspiration for paintings, novels, and cinema across the world. Okay, so that should be an inspiration. And it should be also an inspiration for the researchers to actually make a lot of materials out of the marine organism. By observing them, by studying them, it's an inspiration for making new glues and new materials. These are all novel molecules which can be provided by the marine biodiversity. It may be in the form of an instrument, it may be in the form of a chemical molecule, and all of them definitely inspire from the marine, got inspiration from the marine organisms. So they are actually the source of inspiration. And biomimicry is again a science which is not that much taken up as far as India is concerned. Lot of scope by looking at the animals and then following them in making many of the designing many of the very interesting technological marvels. Look for the future, very important. If you look at the sustainable development targets, 14 is a target to achieve sustainable development. We need to conserve the biodiversity in the oceans. Look for the future, ecosystem restoration, particularly with a focus on the mangrove ecosystem along the coast of India. Look at the future, 2021, 2030, ocean science. Decade of ocean science for sustainable development. We need to promote the scientific enterprises in the oceans, better documentation, better government of data. For example, the research priority, if you look at, we need to comprehensively map the ocean. Okay, and we need to have a better observation system for the ocean, and we need to have a better management adaptation strategy, and ultimately better data and information system. That is where big data is so important. As far as the conservation is concerned, we need capacity building and technology transfer, training and education, and ultimately ocean literacy. Why oceans are important, and the ocean literacy should be part of the major campaigns. There are a large number of global initiatives like Marine Biodiversity Observation Network, which work with huge data, larger data for conservation planning. And that kind of thing also should happen as far as Indian coastal waters are concerned for a larger scale planning. Okay. When we look at the future, and the government is also giving importance. For example, the finance minister, honorable finance minister of government of India, has already announced that Indian fishery exports should reach 1 lakh crore by 2024-25. And the government has actually set apart huge amount of money. Already they have started, the recruiting Sagar Mitras, who will actually initiate or trigger the blue development activities all along the Indian coast. And the production is also, they envisage to double or triple by in the next 20 years' time. And youth in the coastal areas benefit through fish processing and marketing. And that is actually the idea of the government as well. That means many of the youth in the coastal area is going to get employed in this sector, and they need to promote the activities in future. And there is a brighter future for the youngsters as well when you look at the marine biodiversity is concerned. And we should actually voluntarily involved in this process as part of be part of the action and the solution in the coastal area, be it cleaning, be it biodiversity documentation, and the people should be part of this whole exercise. And we need to be part of the education process as well, because we need to kindle the spirit of the youngsters to take up studies and to know more about the oceans and the life therein. And also we need to have better, the educational institutions, including the oceanarium, to promote, to make the people see the wonderful marine life, so that ultimately they will take their steps in protecting the ocean and conserving the ocean, because ocean and the ocean biodiversity is so important for continuing with the life in the ocean, in the planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. Even in this COVID also, you immediately accepted our invitations and you prepared your wonderful presentation for us. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for the invite, and thank you all the participants.